Hey, and welcome back. My name is Siddharth, and I intend to assist you in your quest to learn Visual Basic Programming from scratch. In my last video, what are variables, constants, and data types, I briefly mentioned visibility and scope of variables and constants. In this video, I'm going to cover all of that in detail. We will understand scope not only in terms of variables and constants, but also procedures, sub-procedures, and function procedures. So if you're not aware of what are variables, constants, sub-procedures, function procedures, then I recommend watching those videos, which are what are variables, constants, and data types in Microsoft Excel 365, and what are procedures, which is sub-procedures, and function procedures in Microsoft Excel 365. So let's start with understanding what the scoping means in terms of variables and constants. Variables and constants have three level scopings: procedure level, private module level, and public module level. For procedures, there are two scoping levels: private module level and public module level. You determine the scope of a variable and constant when you declare it. Depending on how you declare them, you make them accessible across procedures and modules. Similarly, you determine the scope of a procedure when you declare it. Depending on how you declare it, you make them accessible across modules. So let's first talk about variables and constants and their scopes with reference to procedure level, private module level, and public module level. Then we will talk about procedure and its scope with reference to private module level and public module level. You can declare variables and constants using the keywords dim, static, const, private, public, private const, and public const. Const stands for constant. We will take a couple of examples to understand how this works. Let's quickly insert a module by right-clicking on the VBA project and then clicking on Insert and clicking on Module. Ensure that you have Option Explicit on top. Option Explicit will force you to declare variables if it is not declared. We will see its merits soon as we progress through this video. Either you can type Option Explicit on top, or you can see my video, Visual Basic Editor, and introduction on how to enable it by default, so that whenever you open a module, it will be there. Now let's take a couple of examples to understand how this works. I'm going to declare my first procedure and I'll call it sample A, sub sample A. Here I will declare a variable called I as long, and I will set a value of 10. Next, I will display the value of I using a message box. So my procedure is now ready. Here, the variable I is defined within this procedure, which means the scope of the I variable is at procedure level. The variable I can be accessed anywhere inside this procedure. So if I run this code, I get the value 10. Now let's insert a second procedure and I will call it sub sample B. And I'm going to copy this line, which is message box I, and I will paste it inside this procedure. Now if we try to run sample B, see what happens. To run this, click on this button which is run sub user form, or you can also press F5 key on your keyboard. We get a variable not defined error, but I have defined a variable, and that is in sample A. This means that the variable which I defined in sample A is not accessible in sample B. That is because the scope of the variable I is at procedure level. It is restricted to the procedure where it is declared, and hence this I cannot see the declaration which is in sample A. For this to work, I will have to again declare it here in this procedure. So I can say dim I as long. And if I now run it, obviously it will give me 0 because I have not set the value. This is one way of doing it. Or what I can do is I can delete it from here and I can move this line right on top. So I'll make some space here and I'll cut this and I will paste it here. Now see what happens when I run sample A. I get value 10, which is fine. Now if I go to sample B and I run it, I get the value 10. That means now both sample A and sample B can see this variable. This is called module level declaration. Any variable which is declared at module level can be accessed from different procedures within that module. What if I had earned a module? Let's quickly insert a module. Insert and module. And we had a procedure, let's call it sample C. And now for module 1, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and I will paste it here. Do you think I will still get 10 when I run this sample C? Let's find out. And we get the same variable not defined error. This is because by default, when you declare a variable or constant using dim at the top of module, it will be private, which means it will be accessible across procedures but only within that module. This is called private module scoping. What if I want to declare a variable which is accessible across procedures in different modules? Like we have in this example, I want this I to work even in this procedure. In such a case, you will have to declare the variable using public. So I'll click on OK. I'll stop the code. I'll go to module 1 and I change dim to public. Now if I run sample A, I get 10. When I run sample B, I get 10. When I go to sample C in module 2 and I run this, I get 10. This is called public module scoping. The same is applicable for constants. You can declare a constant within a procedure to restrict its accessibility. Classic case would be tax rate, where you want different calculations using different tax rate. Let's take an example. So I'm going to delete this and I will declare my constant using the keyword const. Tax rate is equal to 0.18, which is 18%. Let's say I want to display this tax rate using message box. Now when I run this, I get 0.18, which is fine. Now I'm going to declare the procedure. I'll copy this and I'll paste it here and I'll call it sample D. And here I'll make it 20%. So when I run this, the constant will show me 0.2. So I have declared two constants into different procedures and I've restricted their visibility to that particular procedure, just like what we did in the variables. So here, if I want to use tax rate multiple times within that procedure to calculate different results without getting affected by the other value, I can do that. This way, we can use tax rate multiple times within the same procedure to calculate different results without getting affected by the other value. You can also declare the constants at the top of the module and make them private or public depending upon your requirement. For example, you can move this outside like we did in the case of variables. You can either make them private or public. I'll delete this and this. Now see what happens when I run this. I get 0.18 in sample C and I get 0.18 in sample D. Here the tax rate will be accessible across procedures but only in this module. If you want it to be accessible across modules, then simply change this private to public. So we saw how can we declare variables and constants using dim, const private, public, private const and public const. You can also declare them using the word static. Static has the same scope as dim inside a procedure, but static changes a variable's lifetime. Now you may be thinking, what is this new thing lifetime and what does it mean? The lifetime of a variable or constant is the duration of time where a variable exists in memory. So let's go back to module 1 and let's take this example. Here the lifetime of the variable I is restricted only while the procedure is being executed. Once the procedure ends, the lifetime of variable will end. It will no longer exist in memory. However, when you declare a variable using static inside a procedure, the lifetime of variable extends and the variable will exist in memory till the time the application is running. That is the main difference between dim and static. Sometimes you may see people declaring same variable twice, one at module level and the other at procedure level. Something like this, where we have subsample A and in sample B I will declare dim I as long and I will assign the value 15 to it. And in module 2 I'll delete this and I will change this tax rate to I. So I will delete this also. So in module 1 we have subsample A, subsample B where I am setting the value of I to 15, and in module 2 we have subsample C where I am trying to display the value of I. Here I is declared as public. So it is accessible across modules, which means it is accessible by sample C in module 2 as well. Now let's run sample A. We get 10. Now let's run sample B where I have declared a variable and I have assigned a value of 15 to it. When I run this, see what happens. And I get 15. Can you tell me what will be the value of I in sample C? Will it be 10 or will it be 15? Take a moment to think, and the answer is it will be 10 and not 15. Let's try it. See, this concept is called name shadowing, where a variable in a lower scope is given the same name as the variable in a higher scope. When you name scope, then the higher variable is not accessible to the procedure. If you want to access that variable, then you will have to fully qualify that variable by the name of the module where the variable is declared. So if you type the module name followed by the dot operator and then the variable name. For example, I'm going to copy this and paste in below, and before this I will type module 1.I. So I'm saying that this I is this I and not this I. So when I run this, see what happens. I get 15 and then I get 10. That means this I picked up this value and this I picked up the value that I set in sample A. So we have understood the scope of variables and constants with reference to procedure level, private module level and public module level. We also understood how declaring them affects their life cycle. Now let's talk about procedures and its scope with reference to private module level and public module level. Just like you declared a variable, you can declare a sub-procedure or function procedure using private or public. Let's delete everything so that we have a clean slate to work with. Now consider this example. I will create a procedure called subsample A, and in this I will try and calculate the cost. But before I do that, I'm going to declare a function. And I will call it calculate total cost. This function will have 3 arguments. The first one is qty for quantity as long, comma. The second one is fruit rate as double. And fruit tax as double. In this function, I will declare a variable called dim total cost as double. And I will calculate total cost as total cost is equal to quantity multiplied by fruit rate plus quantity multiplied by fruit rate multiplied by fruit tax. And then I will assign this total cost to the function calculate total cost. Now let's call this function from sample A. So I will copy this function name and I will say message box calculate total cost start parenthesis. Let's give few values. Let's say 5 comma fruit rate as 15 comma fruit tax as 0.18, which is 18%. Now when I run this, see what happens. I get 88.5. So what this function is doing is, it is calculating the total cost of the fruit. So 15 is the cost of the fruit, 5 is the total quantity that we bought, which is 15 multiplied by 5, which is 75, plus 18% tax, which comes to 88.5. Now let's copy this sample A and paste it in module 2, and I'll call it sample B. By default, a sub procedure or function procedure is public until and unless you add private to it, which means we can access the function calculate total cost not only in sample A of module 1 but also in sample B of module 2. Let's test it. So I'm going to run this and I get 88.5. What if I do not want calculate total cost to be seen by sample B? In such case, what I will do is I'll go back to module 1 and I will add private function calculate total cost. Now what will happen is this function will only be visible to sample A in module 1 and not to sample B. Now if I run this, see what happens. You will notice that we get a sub or function not defined error. That is because sample B cannot be seen by the procedure anymore. The same is applicable to sub procedure. Now let's add a procedure to module 2. I'm going to quickly stop this code. I will add a second procedure called subsample C, and this I will type sample A. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to call sample A from module 1 into sample C. Like I said earlier, by default a sub procedure or function procedure is public until and unless you add private to it. So I should be able to call sample A from sample C because it is public. So let's run this and you notice that I get 88.5. The code works because sample C can see sample A and sample A can see calculate total cost. Now if I run this, see what happens. I get 88.5. That is because sample C can see sample A and sample A can see calculate total cost because it is in the same module, and hence I was able to refer to calculate total cost indirectly from sample C. Let's go back to module 1. Here we have declared the function as private. If you're planning to use this function as a user-defined function in a worksheet, then do not declare it as a private. If you delete this private, then you will be able to use calculate total cost as a user-defined function in a worksheet. Let's test this. So the name of the function is calculate total cost. Let's go back to the worksheet. And if I type equal to calculate total cost, I can see my function here. Okay. If I go back and I change this to private, then you will notice that when I type equal to calculate, I don't see that function anymore. That's because my function is now private. So like I said, when you're working with user-defined functions, ensure that you do not declare your function as private. A quick recap. We not only learned about scope and visibility of variables and constants, but also of sub-procedures and function procedures. We also learned how to control the visibility of variables across procedures and modules. We saw how declaring the variable or constant in a specific way affected their life cycle. We also learned about name shadowing. Finally, we learned how to declare sub-procedure or function procedure using public and private, thereby controlling their visibility as well. If you still have any questions, feel free to email me on support@tamexcel.com and I will get back to you within 48 hours. Just a quick reminder, I will be posting 2 videos every week, one on Monday and the other on Thursday. If you like the way I explain things and you would like to show some kind of appreciation, then go ahead, drop a few likes, subscribe to this channel by clicking on the bell icon. And I will see you on Thursday when I speak about 5 different kinds of loops that we use in Visual Basic for application.